Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Who's your host, Nick Giordano. Make sure you follow me on social media at P.A.S. Report, and make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast. We have great discussions, and I have a great guest coming on today. I have Steve McGuire. He is the Paul and Karen Levy Fellow in Campus Freedom at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and he directs the Campus Freedom Initiative. So, Steve, welcome to the program. First time on. So tell the audience a little bit about what the Campus Freedom Initiative is, what it does, and why we need more people to get engaged and get involved.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on. Really glad to be with you. Yeah, so the Campus Freedom Initiative is a project aimed at getting colleges and universities to reform their policies and practices in ways that'll better support free expression on campus and intellectual and viewpoint diversity as well. So we have what we call our ACTA Gold Standard for freedom of expression. It's basically 20 action items that we think colleges and universities should take if they haven't already. And basically what we do is we look at colleges, we analyze their policies, we basically, either give them a check or an X for which ones they meet and which ones they don't. And then we write to them, to their boards of trustees, to their presidents, and we say, hey, we'd love to work with you to, improve your record on this. And, what we routinely find is out of the 20 things that we're looking at, it's not uncommon for schools to get maybe like a 6, an 8, a 9. So there's usually lots of room for improvement. And, as far as people getting involved, I mean, the more people who are paying attention to these issues and putting pressure on colleges and universities to reform themselves, for their own good, for the better, I think the more successful we'll be over time.
Yeah, for their own survival, right? I mean, if they don't reform, I don't know how many people are going to really have any faith in higher ed. It's at an all-time low already. I believe the number is 37% of the American people have faith in our higher education institutions.
Yeah.
And do any of the schools or universities around the country have any received a perfect score of 20 out of 20?
Not that I'm aware of. We're a little bit early in the project. We're really starting to roll out scores for schools now. We're actually going to be publishing a batch just in the very near future here. I think the best that I've seen so far, and I can't say which school yet, unfortunately, because we haven't published it yet, but I think the best we've seen so far is in 18. And so, by what we've seen, that's actually a, fairly excellent work that that particular institution is doing as far as these things go.
Yeah, that's definitely promising to hear.
Yeah. And you're right about the confidence data. And, if you look at, for instance, the Gallup polls on this, then they ask people, well, why don't you have confidence? And they point to exactly the kinds of things you'd expect, right? They say, well, we're not getting the right kind of education. We're worried about return on investment, and we're worried about political agendas, and they categorize under that things like bias and that sort of thing. And so I think you're exactly right that, this is about both the institutions intrinsically living up to what they ought to be. And it's also in their interests in terms of their relationship to our, broader political society.
Yeah, I think there's a reckoning in higher education right now, and it's a reckoning of their own making. I mean, it didn't have to go this way, but the decisions they made led it to this point. And there's also a reckoning in education. So one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on is because I saw a post you put out on X where you talked about UC San Diego and a report that they released where it shows entering freshmen can't add single-digit numbers. They don't know how to round to the nearest 100. 40% can't subtract fractions. I mean, we're talking basic stuff. My 11-year-old is doing this stuff right now. It's truly amazing. These are elementary school skills. Right. And what does this level of decline say about the state of the K through 12 education system in America? And how widespread is this problem?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, there's so many ways to look at this report and various reasons to, try to explain how this has happened. But I think you do have to look at the K to 12 system. And, I focus in my work primarily on higher ed. But of course, K to 12, exists in a kind of mutually reinforcing relationship, right? Like you send people from K to 12 into higher ed, and then also people who come out of higher ed go back into K to 12 to be teachers. So, there's that cycle there. And I do have my own.
I call it a doom loop.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Yeah. And I have I have 5 kids. So I have, who are going through school right now. So I see all this firsthand in terms of my own personal experience as well. But quite clearly, there's a major problem with maintaining standards, and there's a push to get students through the education system without making sure that they learn the kinds of things that they need to learn in order to advance through that system. And, I think it was Kelsey Piper just did an analysis of this report that was published the other day. And, she showed that, she was pointing out that 25% of these students, right, are getting, I think it was like, either 3.7 or 4.0 GPAs, I think in like high school calculus or something. I don't want to misquote her, but it was something shocking like that. And so you're like, okay, these kids are coming and they're applying for UC San Diego with A's in AP calculus. And then, when they administer these exams, they have to put them in remedial math. And UC San Diego had for years already one remedial math class that was aimed at sort of shoring up gaps that students had from high school math. And then they found that they had to add a second one that looked at elementary and middle school math. So they now have 2 remedial classes. And right, you're referencing these kids can't do basic elementary or middle school math problems.
Yeah, and it's funny because when we were going back and forth, I'm like, the numbers aren't surprising. And then you're like, they're not surprising. But what's surprising is that UNC actually released this report. It does show the dire state of education when we're looking at it. And I think it's important to bring up grade point average, because if we go back to, the 1990s, the average grade point average was 2.6 or 2.7 with GPA. Mm-hmm. Today, it's 3.3 in higher ed. And yet, if students can't even do basic math, the number's inflated. But the more important question, I mean, we have to be honest here. We see the failures, the lack of standards that exist in the K through 12 system. It's now filtered up into the higher ed system. And we're constantly told that we have to have high standards. But yet, if we fail everyone in the classroom because they're not as capable as the previous generational cohort, what would happen to a university professor if they just started failing everyone because they're not up to the standards?
Yeah, no, I think that it's really problematic. Another example would be, say, looking at cases of plagiarism with AI too. I'm sure
it's brutal.
Yeah, and it's just widespread. And I think if professors were to actually report and discipline students for every instance of academic dishonesty, right, that would be like a full-time job for an army of bureaucrats sorting through all of these cases. But yeah, just
there would be 3 or 4 kids left in the classroom.
Well, exactly. And, I've had cases in the past, where as a teacher where I've dealt with this, and, you have to kind of navigate through it, where there's a batch of students in a class who have clearly plagiarized. Now that, I was teaching before AI even became a problem, and that was already an issue. But yeah, as far as the standards, you hear this all the time, and I've experienced it myself as a former professor, the standards going down over time. And, you just sort of have to work with the students that the admissions office gives to you, and you take them where they're at and then try to bring them up to a higher level. But I think professors increasingly find that they cannot get students to the level that they used to think they ought to be at, right? And so I think the standards just decline over time, because once you're in the classroom with these students as a professor, what are you going to do? And I think this is especially the case. I taught at a couple of different institutions, and I taught at one that was a fairly low-ranked institution that was very much tuition-driven. And that's another factor here, is if you start failing kids out of your classes because they can't meet basic standards, and your other colleagues start doing that as well, and these students have to be removed from the university because they're getting D's and F's in all their classes, well, that hurts the bottom line of the institution too. So there's a sort of corporate pressure there as well, I think, to continue sort of pushing these kids through the college, because it needs their tuition dollars, whether those are coming from loans or what have you.
Certainly. And, you go to an elite Ivy League institution like Harvard, and you'll find that the research papers written by students today are not as high a caliber as those written 30 years ago. But also, I see it in my classroom, right? I teach at the community college level. I teach American government. I should be teaching more in theory and getting deep into the concepts of American government. But I got to go back to the basics because my students come in, they've never read the Constitution, they've never read the Declaration of Independence. Some don't even know about the three branches of government or the structure of federalism. So what do you think? How do we begin to change this structure?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's definitely an uphill battle. In some ways, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of this doom cycle. That needs to be reversed. You're talking about American government. I think only less than ACTA has a program that called "What Will They Learn?" that looks at core curricula, and I think over 1,300 colleges, universities around the country, and we find that only less than 20% of those require students to take a class in American government or American history.
So
right.
crazy.
So then some of these people presumably go back, to be teachers in the K-12 system. And then just over time, you get this cycle and then the students arrive. And I have to say, I'm a political scientist by training as well, although a political theorist, but I did used to teach Intro to American Government as well. And I had the exact same experience that you're describing. And you do just have to kind of take the students where they're at. I think what we need to do is work to somehow improve the standards over time, both at, the higher ed level and at the K-12 level. There are these new civic centers that are being created around the country, for example, that are trying to, reinvigorate civics. ACTA certainly advocates for a reinvigorated civics education program, as do other organizations. The Jack Miller Center comes to mind. So there are people working on this. They're cultivating more and more professors and institutions that will promote this kind of thing. But obviously this needs to apply to not just civics, but to writing, to mathematics, obviously from the UC San Diego report. But I do think that a lot of it has to start at the K-12 level, because by the time the students arrive in your classroom, or somebody else's classroom, there's only so much you can do in terms of remedial work. And I think that's what the math department at UC San Diego, that's one of the things they're saying is, at a certain point, it would take so many of our resources, so much of our time and energy to bring these students to the place where they would need to be just to even start here, that we just can't do that. And that's presuming that you could actually get the students, up to that level eventually. So I think we need major reform, across the board in terms of raising standards. And it's a structural problem. It's a collective action problem. So it's going to be a difficult fix.
Yeah, and obviously civics is near and dear to my heart, and the fact that only 20% of colleges will require an American government course. And I sit there and I'm like, government and politics impacts every single aspect of our lives, including the professions that they're majoring in. So, some of the required courses they have to take will never impact their profession whatsoever, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. However, when we look at it, it's about, I believe, nationwide, 50% of incoming freshmen have to take at least one remedial course of what they should have learned in high school. It's 60% for the community colleges, 40% for the four-year institutions. But what really frustrates me, where is the anger and the outrage? Mm-hmm. I mean, if we take spending from kindergarten through college, federal, state, and local level, we spend over $1.5 trillion a year in education. And the results are abysmal. I mean, they're catastrophic. Why aren't more people angry about this? And why do we tolerate this failure that would never be accepted in any other industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it certainly makes you wonder about what are the incentive structures in the education industry that, make this okay and get people to accept it. I mean, you cited the confidence data in higher education, at the beginning of the conversation, and clearly people are aware, and there's other stats too about like employers, who are surveyed about the recent college grads that they're hiring, and they routinely say that the people that they're getting lack basic skills that they would would expect or like them to have in terms of critical thinking, in terms of communication abilities, right? The UC San Diego report didn't focus on it because they didn't have as much data, but they do mention that the writing skills of the incoming students are abysmal as well. And, you know,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I wrote an article over at a campus forum where it's over $2 billion per year companies have to spend to bring in remedial writing trainers for college graduates, new hires.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the effects on the economy, on businesses, they're all around us. I mean, my guess is that a lot of people individually, maybe they feel like they've made it through the system. They've gotten into the college they want, and then they get a job and they're doing fine. So they don't notice the sort of larger picture. But I'm not really sure, because a lot of the data does show that people are dissatisfied. I mean, I just think there's probably, like I said, various incentives in the system that allow for these kinds of outcomes, and maybe people just feel kind of helpless too. Like, the problem is so bad and it's so massive. What are we going to do about it?
Well, I mean, I know you focus a lot on the higher ed institutions, but as a father of 5, I'm looking at outrage towards the K through 12 system that has failed the students and has basically abandoned them. And I don't see outrage from parents. It's like, as long as they could get their kids on the bus and in the classroom, doesn't matter how the schools are performing. And what makes it even worse is the numbers are actually worse than they report, because every state and the federal government has dropped down and redefined what basic proficiency means. So the numbers are even worse than being reported out there.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that upsets me too, from a personal standpoint, is on the occasions where I have tried to say, or my wife has tried to say something to teachers, often the response that you get is somewhat dismissive. Like, we've had some frustrations, for example, with our 6-year-old doing Common Core math, basically, and these problems are ridiculous. It's obviously not that they're hard, right? We're not struggling the way some of the UCSD admits are, but you're reading the problem and you're like, I don't even know what this is asking, or I don't know how I would answer this question in another way. And they're asking 6-year-olds to do it, or, they're asking them to write out in full sentences when maybe half the students in the class aren't even capable of doing that yet, right? Like, they're still learning to read and write. And, teachers just seem to kind of, be stuck in their ways, or they're not invested in trying to improve the situation. Maybe they're not getting, pressure, or they feel protected in their roles. And so they feel like they don't need to, sort of do something. I mean, I'm sure there's obviously lots of great teachers. People get into it because they love, kids and helping them out and that sort of thing. But, clearly we also have a problem with people who are, pursuing education for young children in ways that aren't really maximally effective, or aren't holding them to high standards. And, for them, making sure that these kids come out having learned what they're supposed to learn is either something they don't feel they're capable of doing, or it's not ultimately their primary incentive or concern.
Well, it's also a matter of, not only did they drop the standards academically, they also dropped the standards behavior-wise. And it seems like, kids and the parents run the classrooms too. And this is creating a toxic environment that exists, where you have a lot of teachers, many of whom who are just pressured to cycle them through the system like we always do. And then, everyone always asks, well, we need more money. We spend more than any other country. Take almost every country combined. We spend more on education, and yet the results are getting worse and worse and worse. And so when we look at the system itself, when we look at the idea of victim versus victimizer, oppressor versus oppressed, and the woke ideology that's infected the schools, you look at the funding, how that's gone not towards academics, it's gone to DEI staff. I mean, you look at any university, you'll find a DEI department of like 30 people. Yeah. The amount of money that's being spent on DEI, the amount of money that's being spent on amenities at college campuses, it's not going to academics. How do we change that mindset?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, that's definitely something that we emphasize at ACTA too, right? Is using financial resources effectively for the educational purposes of the institutions. And you're exactly right. You see like ballooning budgets for all sorts of bureaucrats. And then, these cause other problems too, because then these bureaucrats are there, they need something to do, they need three people under them so they can feel that they have sufficient status within the institution. And they end up meddling with like students' free speech rights and all these sorts of things. So it has it reverberates throughout the institution, all the different effects. And colleges right now, of course, are facing the prospect of the the enrollment cliff that seems like it's supposed to kick in next year. They have all kinds of financial constraints on them, and so you'd think that they would be looking for ways to shave money. And when they did, they would get rid of some of these extras that they have in the institution and direct it to instructional cost, because I think it's true to a large degree that at the end of the day, what drives education is having, time spent between good teachers and their students, right? So if you have one teacher who's lecturing to 200 people, and there's only so much that those students are going to get out of that class, and if any of them are struggling, the professor's not really in much of a position to help them. Maybe there's a couple of TAs that, have some office hours. But, if you're running seminars, you've got 16 people in the room with one professor, and you can go over things together. I think models like that, breed success. But at a lot of institutions, they've moved more in the direction of having, massive classes where there's not a lot of interaction. But, one of the main expenses of higher ed is and should be the faculty members, right? But instead, they want to spend money on these other things.
Yeah, I find when faculty members retire, they just close down the lines. Don't bring anyone new in.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
I think what you just said is so important. When it comes to colleges and universities in particular, how important is it for a professor to also serve as a mentor? I mean, you can't possibly mentor, if you're teaching 3 classes with 200 students, you can't possibly mentor 600 students. As far as the mentorship goes, because let's face it, when we look at colleges, we want to graduate people that are competent human beings, people that could think critically, that could solve problems, and that could produce themselves, sustain themselves, as opposed to becoming a blight on the government coffers.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is the key to mentorship when it comes to college?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that part of it is that you have to have only a certain number of students that you're really responsible for in terms of that role. And that means having a faculty large enough that you can have, a professor for, I don't know exactly what the magic number would be, but, an instructor to student ratio that makes that work. The other thing I'll say is a lot of professors, you go through grad school, as you know, and you're taught to be a researcher. You're not necessarily taught to be a teacher or a mentor in a lot of programs. And then you go into say a tenure track role at a major university, and it's publish or perish. And I think a lot of faculty, they get caught up in that, and to some degree rightfully so, because that's how they got their job and that's how they're going to get tenure and keep their job. But I think there's a lot of faculty too who would do and would like to spend more time focusing on their teaching, focusing on mentoring students. And when you've got all kinds of bureaucratic duties that are added to your role, as like committees proliferate in your department, right? You got to be, there's a DEI committee. There's a, I was at one school where we had a committee on committees. This is the committee just for like assigning people to committees.
We have to take a pre-meeting for a meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, professors taking a personal interest in their students and getting to know them personally is critical to the kind of mentorship that you're referring to, because you get to understand, like, well, what is the student really interested in? What motivates this student? What sorts of interests and goals do they have? And, you really can't get that by looking at a student's transcript on a computer or by grading their one term paper that they write for a lecture class that has 100 people in it. You need to be able to spend time with students. And I have to say too that when I haven't taught for a couple of years now, but my experience was increasingly that students didn't come by for office hours anymore. That
No,
culture of
definitely
like
not.
stopping in just to chat, that was there when I started teaching, when I came out of grad school. But by the time I was done, it just wasn't there anymore. And so that to me suggests that something's breaking down too, in terms of the way that colleges and universities sort of communicate a culture of learning to their students, and sort of what they can do, to get to know their professors, maybe make some connections, get some mentorship, that sort of thing.
It's a great point. And, a lot of people, they like to blame COVID for everything. I think COVID just sped everything up, because we were seeing these problems prior to COVID, where
Yeah.
the standards were falling, student performance was falling, lack of coming to office hours was falling. And so I think you're right about that. Now, you brought up the enrollment cliff before. America is an aging society. There's obviously less students to pull from. Between that, you factor in the loss of confidence in higher educations, the loss of confidence in four-year degree programs. Businesses, 50%, just last year alone, did away with four-year degree requirements for a number of positions within their businesses. What do you think is going to happen when a lot of the mid-tier schools are, the public schools, the public universities, public community colleges, obviously they get their funding from the taxpayer, and so they'll remain.
Mm-hmm.
The Ivy Leagues have enough in their endowments and enough of a reputation. I don't know why at this point, but they'll remain. What do you think is going to happen to a lot of those mid-tier schools? And do you think if they do have to close down, that maybe that would reinvigorate academic rigor, and there'll be more of a discussion of how we bring these standards up?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's always perilous to try and predict the future, but we have seen that the rate of colleges closing has been increasing already over recent years. And I think the enrollment cliff is really supposed to hit. I mean, it's already kind of building up, I think, but it's really supposed to hit in the fall. And now, of course, you've got other pressures. There was a report just the other day that the number of international students who enrolled this year is down 17%. I think it was mostly grad students, and it was a preliminary report, but there are pressures like that as well. But yeah, I think you're right that the sort of mid to lower tier schools are the ones that are going to be in a lot of trouble. I think if you're an elite school, you're not going to have a problem getting students who want to come. I mean, even if you're in the, I don't know, say top 100, your admissions rates are probably good enough that you're just going to, maybe dip a little bit deeper into the pool and still be able to fill your classes. Community colleges, probably fine. State schools, although in Pennsylvania, where I am, they're closing a bunch of the regional satellites of the Penn State system because it's just so financially not viable any longer. And there obviously is some sadness to that, right? If you live in one of these smaller cities throughout the state, and maybe you wanted to go and get some education to help you, get a better job or get a promotion at work, now you've got to look at a different school, or maybe even look at commuting a little bit or doing it online, I suppose. Like, there are options. But yeah, as far as standards, I'm not really sure, because of course part of the problem here is that the population is declining, right? So if we still have a similar mix of abilities or educational background, across the population, then I think part of the problem is that even the schools that do fine, like I said, they're going to have to go a bit deeper into the pool to get students. So even elite schools might end up getting some students who otherwise normally 10 years ago they wouldn't have admitted, because they would have said, your test scores are a little too low. And I mean, that goes back to my experience again, teaching at this small college when I first got out of grad school. And, every year it seemed the standard for an SAT score that you had to have in order to get admitted to our college was going down, because we needed the students to survive. Right. And, I had issues with that, because we're bringing in students who are probably not prepared to succeed. Maybe they're spending their own money. More likely they're taking out student loans. And what are they getting for their trouble, for their time and all that debt or money that they're spending? And I think
that's
we'll
a great
see more of
point.
that.
It's a great point. I mean, the fact of the matter is, not everyone is fit for higher education. And so you're not doing them any services by, filtering them through. They might be better off learning a trade or starting their own business. We have this myth that the only way to success in life is through a 4-year degree, and that's certainly not true.
Yeah.
But Steve, I really enjoyed the conversation. Would love to have you back to talk about this more. Can you tell everyone where to go for yourself and to follow you as well as ACTA?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and thanks for having me on. This has been great. So ACTA you can find at goacta.org. And me, the best way to find me is on X, and my handle there is SF McGuire79.
Very good. So we'll also have it up at the P.A.S. Report website, everyone. So go to PASreport.com. Steve, thanks so much. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.